Welcome back to the NABLiveshow.com. I'm your host, Deborah Kaufman, with the Entertainment Technology Center. For our last panel today, we're going to be dealing with a topic that's extremely important, digital asset management. DAM is something that's really on everybody's lips today. You hear it everywhere on the NAB 2015 show floor. And the reason is, of course, there's a huge, endless amounts of video production right now. Yep. Video is the name of the game. And I think it's kind of an overwhelming concept for a lot of people. You know, you've got huge quantities of assets. How do you manage them? How do you know what you have? How do you find what you have? And more importantly, if you're, some kind of a facility where you're generating or storing or managing assets, how do you get started? But before we get into our conversation, I have to introduce my panelists. I'm excited about this topic, as you can see. Just to my left is Dave Clack, who's CEO of Squarebox. In the middle we have Dane Pearson, a sales engineer with Cinedec. And last but not least, Anthony Magliocco, VP of Business Development, Entertainment and Media Technology Marketing. So, Dave, I know you have some passionate thoughts also about how you get started in this.
Oh, absolutely.
Please, let us hear.
So, I guess the trend in the industry is more, right? Everyone has more content, more formats, more distribution channels, more mechanisms to use that content in a way that's going to be useful and going to monetize and add value to it. And it's a really pertinent question. How do people get started? It's a fairly young industry, digital asset management. So our product's been around for about 14 years, and for probably 5 of those, folks didn't realize that they had a problem. I think today, with high bit rate, high data rate, and just the huge number of the different kind of formats that people are shooting in, they really do realize they have a problem. But folks end up with content everywhere. It's on shelves, it's on sands, but just because it's on the sand doesn't mean you can find it and reuse it and repurpose it. So we find customers, the very best way of getting started with asset management is to draw some pictures. Try and get a clear definition of what it is you're trying to do. What are you trying to automate? How can you design workflows that aren't going to get in the way? You really want to spend 5 seconds today to save you 3 or 4 hours later. You don't want asset management to become a huge burden that you're spending 5 minutes per asset doing logging and tagging, because then your system will fall into disrepute and it won't get used. And there's a huge number of systems out there that are sold by asset management firms that are not really being well used. So that workflow analysis, how to get started, working with some folks that understand workflows, automation, and having a clear view of what you want to achieve is vital, irrespective of what product you choose to go with.
Well, I wonder in hearing this, there's that old feeling of like, if you have a problem when you've actually had the problem for a long time, is it too late when you finally realize you have a problem? Are you, is it too hard to go back and?
Well, some folks do. It is much better when you buy your storage and you have a nice clean empty sand to start off with a neat and tidy thing, but that's kind of never the real world, right? So there's plenty of tools and techniques. You can start off just doing asset management for the new stuff, and then as you need to recover stuff from archive, you can bring that back online, log it and tag it. And so there's plenty of ways of folks getting started, and something is better than nothing. There's some stats in the industry that say 1 in every 10 hours that a media professional works is spent managing files. That's $8,000 at least per year per media professional. A third of searches for media fail. Well, what do you do then? Do you have to purchase it again from somewhere else? Do you have to reshoot it? I mean, how much cost is that?
Well, I'd like to hear from Anthony. Anthony, I know that you consult with a lot of companies on their digital asset management needs, and I'm sure you've heard some hair-raising stories.
Well, it's interesting, as we heard earlier from Dave, that the complexity of it is starting to get overwhelming, and I think you hit the nail on the head. Where do you begin? Sometimes it's easier just starting with what you're doing right now, so you get a good handle on it and get started with it, and as you learn as you go, because if you think you have to work on the whole library the first day, you'll be frightened and you'll want to give up. So I think that's what most people tackle, and I think that's worked out. What I get involved in is a lot of people is that now we have to repurpose those files for different distribution platforms. So I'm involved with automated QC tools and things like that, where people are saying, okay, I have this file, but now I've got to keep a different version, and I've got to make different versions for all of those other outlets that I need to deliver to. And so that becomes more complicated. And if you don't have a good handle on what's in the original source, and now the subsequent versions, which you also have to now track and catalog, and if, you know, the old expression, garbage in, garbage out, well, if you start off with a bad file and you convert it, now you have 2 bad files. So it's rather interesting. So, and it's a process, and we struggle with a lot of folks saying, well, I have to sit and watch every hour. No, it's impossible to watch every hour, but with some automated tools and some human tools, now you can do both. So I think it's like all new things. In the early days of digital asset management, a lot of people say, oh, it's not too hard, but now you realize you must do it, you must do it.
Right.
Yeah, you know, we come at it from a slightly different perspective. You know, really, when you say starting at the beginning, we literally say start at the beginning, and that really is with file naming. I mean, if you've got a system that generates files that are ABMQ4963, what do you do with that? So, I mean, you know, with our systems, you name it the way you want it to be, and it's completely human readable. You can name your files whatever you want. We give you the master, the proxy, etc. And then as soon as you tie that into the asset management system, hopefully at the beginning of the production, because that's really where you want to be doing it. As soon as you start, if you're doing it right then, it's only easy down the line. If you're picking it up at the end, it's all catch up. I mean, that's what you're sort of saying. You know, when you're starting in the middle, you've just got so much work to do, and it becomes overwhelming. So if you start at the very beginning of the process, you're already halfway there.
Right.
And you know, I think a lot of folks, when they say they're starting with nothing, they generally have something. So file naming conventions, folder and directory structures, spreadsheets, people find ways of getting by without asset management, and the more that you can do when getting started to harvest that stuff, you know, take the first 3 characters of the file name, expand that out into some metadata that then becomes searchable, findable, extract the folder names and make that
right. But when you can take that process and move it closer to the beginning of the food chain,
exactly,
the closer you can get it to the front, your work is half done.
You know, and a lot of the cameras now have some great tools to be able to do on-set logging. You know, if you can start that logging as close to content shoot as you can, then, you know, it's just reducing the time it takes someone later to log and tag and make it usable.
And yet somebody told me today, it was a sad thing to hear, but somebody told me today that most metadata gets thrown away.
Oh, I think that's probably true, yeah. Yeah.
I mean, isn't that something that if we're interested in our assets, we should be worried about?
Well, and I think almost more scarily than that, the volume of B-roll footage that is thrown away at the end of a shoot. I think there's a psychological change when, in the new world of taking content, we have a sports team customer, and they were describing the change in attitude they have now when using asset management fully. So they go out to a game, and on the way home, typically on the plane, they'll do some logging in our product and tagging, and they'll be logging it and tagging it, not for tonight's show, for the highlights reel, for the news and all that. They'll be logging and tagging it to become an asset that's going to be part of the history of that sports team. And so when it comes to the end of the season and they want to do a roundup of the highlights of the season, or an athlete gets some award and they want to say, you've shown me all the 5-star clips for this athlete for the last 2 or 3 seasons, that is a 2 or 3 minute search to come up with 100 items as a short list, and then you've got the content for a 20-minute show, just needs some narrative, some effects, topping and tailing, and you've got enough content to feed a whole channel.
Well, this is a question for all of you, but Anthony, I'd like your opinion on this first. It sounds, the whole idea of digital asset management seems so customized, that it has to be customized to your particular needs. Is it a one-size-fit-all that can be scaled up and down, or is each one, is it snowflakes where each one is different? Anthony?
I think you're right, and I think if you've studied the topic a little bit, there's different classes for the different parts of the business that you're in. So if you're in production, you have live production, say, you have different sets of needs and different part of the process that you have to really get your hands around and get your arms around it and manage that. If you're in post-production, you have another set of needs because now you're dealing with different groups who are moving files in and around, all around the world. And then if you're in the archive business, a completely new set of problems. So, and I think there's some really good stuff going on right now to help people understand you should really be clear about where you are in the process of adopting these solutions. Do you agree, gents?
No, I think I do, yeah.
Well, and the other trick is buy-in. I mean, you've got so many
Right.
different cultures. I mean, just sort of production cultures, and all of them come from the tape world where it all came after the fact. And I mean, some people they immediately pick it up and it's like, okay, this was great, I'm going to do it. But there's a lot of folks that they just can't get their head wrapped around the fact that we need to do this now and not later.
Well, Dane, your digital asset management is specific to a product, correct? To the set.
Well, I mean, we came out with a joint product with another asset management company. So we primarily do recorders, but we have this very flexible file naming. But when you can join that up with asset management on set, as it were, on location, as I said, you're at the top of the food chain, and you're going to be adding to it as you go down, but you're not starting halfway through the process already. You've already got that information right there at the top.
So what are the specifics, what are the parameters of what you've designed for this digital asset management that's going to be the top of the food chain?
Well, I mean, we're working with Axel in this particular case, but really any asset management system would work in that sort of a scenario. We do multi-channel recorders. It's in a flight case, keyboard, monitor, mouse. You've got a standalone system there. There's other sort of digital daily aspects to it that are not really relevant for the metadata asset management part of it. But really, having that asset management system up front, if you can do it, you've got the data.
You've got the data.
I mean, you're throwing it away by not being there. That's kind of what it amounts to.
We encounter a problem where files will arrive, and there are. In the old days, you had a tape and there was a label on the box. Well,
piece of paper stuck in.
It's not the same. In film, you could actually hold it up to the light, maybe see some crayon markers, but we found that a lot of labels or metadata isn't actually reflective of what's inside the box, inside the file. So one of the early tests that we do in the testing application is to verify that actually matches what we thought we were supposed to get. And it's surprising because once you start doing your QC, if you're applying the wrong test to the wrong file, you're basically going to fail. So you waste a lot of time. So we found that it seems like a simple thing, but humans were actually opening the files with little viewers to check that, to see if it was in fact what was in the file.
It's so funny, we just finished a panel on on-set dailies, and that was the same thing where these little human pieces are so crucial to what otherwise...
Humans are the biggest problem, but you can't do without them.
Exactly.
Yeah, I think that's true.
So what are some of the other questions that people need to think about and ask themselves when it comes to digital asset management?
Well, I think, folks need to really think very carefully about why they're doing asset management. So we have a whole pile of customers that come to us and say, we really need it. But just getting then under the skin of, are you doing this to be able to find and repurpose that content? What's it worth to you? How much money are you going to be saving? Understanding that stuff is absolutely vital. Understanding whether people want asset management to help with workflow automation, or with visibility of storage, no matter whether it's stuff's on a shelf or on a SAN or on an archive, whether you're looking at thumbnails, proxies, all that kind of stuff. You need to be absolutely clear before you start, why are you doing this stuff? And then map out your workflow. And then this whole point about adoption that we were talking about earlier, that becomes so much easier.
Well, I'm curious with the adoption aspect of it, I'm wondering, does there need to be a training component that goes along with the product?
Oh,
absolutely.
If you take on any new product or any new workflow, if you don't build into your budget training, you're really setting yourself up for failure. And this is something that many companies seem to overlook. They negotiate the price and they know they have to pay the service contract, but if they don't actually build into the schedule the time for their staff to get proper training, boy, the results usually are diminished. And this has happened so many times. And I think the other thing that we're also faced with, I was involved with a large project with Disney where they have assets all over the globe. And this is not uncommon now. We have so many multinational companies. So will your application be able to manage all of these different locations and all of the different versions? Because when they want to do the retrospective of your films or your projects, will we find those assets again to make that?
Well, I'm curious though, if I'm, this kind of brings us full circle back to where do you get started?
Yeah.
If I'm interested in digital asset management and I'm interested in looking at products, but I'm also interested in getting trained. How do I get trained?
Well, so our approach to the market when selling CatDV is very deliberately to go through a distribution channel and a dealer network. We think that there's a lot of good software out there. CatDV is great software, and there are plenty of other products. This training we're talking about is not particularly product training. We all have simple but powerful tools that do stuff. the things that need training is the culture change that is involved in not just making tonight's program or today's project, but in making this an asset that can be used for the long term. Our approach to that in the market is to use a network of dealers who understand their customers, understand their business problems and challenges, and can be with them for the long term. So that way we have dealers that can really help with solving real business problems for the future, rather than just dropping a piece of software on that doesn't then get used well.
Right, I understand. And we have to wrap it up shortly in the next minute or two, but I'm interested in what Dane and Anthony, what do you do? What do you recommend for training?
There's no question that there's training necessary, both on a technical level, but also on that sort of adoption level of convincing people this is really what you need to be doing. Yeah. And my bottom line is, something is way better than doing nothing.
And I learned, I used to run products for a manufacturing company, and one of the things that you have to do is you have to have buy-in at all of the levels of the team. Because if one person is on board doing the work and the rest are not, the system will fall apart, and this is really critical.
Well, thank you guys very much. I think this is a really good wake-up call for what we need to do with digital asset management. Thank you all for listening. I'll be back at 3 o'clock tomorrow. I'm your host, Deborah Kaufman of Entertainment Technology Center. Goodbye.